approaching Parliament Square as I do every morning around that. Coming down, stopped the traffic lights just before they go on the superhighway. I turned left with fellow cyclists. As I come round the corner, I could see on the right-hand side where the traffic lights are on the opposite side of the road that there was a cyclist, unfortunately, had been injured and hit, and there was a number of other cyclists standing around. There was a couple sitting down as well. There was a couple of pedestrians attending to that injured person. As I carried on, just obviously you slow down, see what's happening. As I carried on down, I was told to get off my bike by a police officer. It looked like a police officer by themselves, and they said to me to get off the bike and to move back and to back up the road. Clearly, and they mentioned that there was an incident. As I got off my bike, I could clearly see in the distance there was a car in the barrier with smoke. It seemed to me like it had just happened. As I then dismantled my bike and walked across the road, clearly I felt to myself it was a clear serious incident, and my first instinct with a young son and a wife at home was to get away from the scene. I could see that the injured cyclist on the road appeared to be a lady in a recovery position, was being attended by a paramedic who had turned up. So I walked across the road up to Westminster Abbey. There wasn't any injuries. There was obviously a lot of confusion. I could hear a lot of sirens and obviously response vehicles coming towards the scene. I then continued to walk up that road. I rang my wife to let her know that I was okay, anticipating there'd be some news coverage of this stuff. And as I walked up, I then pulse, and I did, and that was what I did. I continued on my way to work.
Yeah. And when you say other cyclists told you that the car had come across the road, can you tell if the car that ended up at the barrier would have had to drive on the wrong side of the road where you saw the injured cyclist on the floor?
Well, coming from where I was coming from, I mean, clearly the cyclist was on that side, was on the opposite side of the road, where if you're cycling that way, you would go round Parliament Square, around the one-way system. And there's only two ways that have happened. Is the cyclist was hit at force and forced across the road at force and has gone onto the other side of the road, or they'd been hit on that side of the road. So from where I saw it, it does look like that could have clearly happened. And whether, I mean, as I said, when I walked up Westminster towards Westminster Abbey, there was no other injured people. So there's two ways you can drive, on the wrong side of the road there. And the side that you would come across, you had to try to avoid the traffic lights on that side. So I hadn't seen that, but it does seem plausible that would have been the case.
Yeah. And how do you reflect, James, on the aftermath of what you witnessed?
Well, I mean, normally I'd be coming through about 5 minutes earlier than that. But for myself, fortunately, my bike lock on my bike wouldn't open when I was getting on my bike at Chelmsford this morning, which meant I missed my train by about 2 minutes. So I reflect on it being very lucky. I'm really glad to hear that those cyclists aren't injured in any major way. And,
this is happening this morning.
Especially when you've got a young family at home, and so it's pretty shook up. But I'm just glad that those people are okay.
Hello there. Well, let's just bring you right up to date on the very latest from here at Westminster, where the police are saying that a man in his 20s is now under arrest, being questioned on suspicion of terror offences. He's being held at a South London police station. That's after a vehicle collided with cyclists just outside the Palace of Westminster, and then appeared to ram security barriers at the Palace of Westminster. And the man inside that vehicle, a silver Ford Fiesta, was very quickly arrested by armed police. Well, a number of eyewitnesses have talked a lot about the speed with which the armed police intervened and managed to take that man into custody. We can talk now to the former Commons Deputy Speaker, Nigel Evans, who's here with me, just outside the police cordon. All a little bit chaotic here, but this is as close as we can get to the Palace of Westminster. Nigel Evans, what are your thoughts? Were you here when it unfolded this morning?
No, I was doing the Julie Hartley-Brewer show, and so, of course, they've got TV monitors there, and the story broke at about 7:30. I was with a Labour MP, Jim Fitzpatrick, and we were able to see where the vehicle was so that we knew that normally there would be police there, and that vehicle would have followed the route into the car park for the House of Lords. But clearly at 7:30 in the morning, and we're in recess, I'm not too sure whether there were any police there at that moment in time, but they were certainly there shortly afterwards, because we saw the number of armed police who are constantly now around the parliamentary estate. They were onto the scene incredibly quickly. But it's, led to chaos, clearly, for people who work in Parliament today. My staff are now all working from home, which is quite right. Safe for them to do it from home. But the only people who would be in Parliament at 7:30 during a recess would be cleaners and people working in the restaurants. The chances of any members of Parliament or any members of government being on site is particularly scarce, I would say. And also, when he rammed into the barrier, where was he going to go next? It was a terrorist attack. Because if you got through that barrier, then the chances of him getting the vehicle any further is incredibly remote, because there's further barriers all the way along that route. So the security that is there clearly worked today, and I'm really grateful for the security forces for doing what they did. But clearly it's going to reignite debate as to the security of Parliament for the people who work there, and I'm sure that pedestrianisation of Parliament Square and which vehicles should be able to access so closely Parliament will be reignited. I'm absolutely certain about that.
And security was tightened after last year's attack at Westminster. This is the second, what appears, from what we know so far, the second attack in 2 years on the heart of British democracy. How worried are you about that?
Oh, very worried. And I know it's something that the Deputy Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, John Bercow, and others constantly look at as to, it's not just the security of our democracy, but you have to remember there are tens of thousands of people who work on the parliamentary estate, from whether it's cleaners to people who are working in restaurants to researchers, my own staff. It's all going to be looked at to make sure that people are able to go about their normal duties, and also for the British democracy, and that is home of
Nor, in the wake of what we saw last year, is London and perhaps the UK kind of almost prepared and bracing itself for possible terror attacks all the time?
Well, you have to. When I first got elected in 1992, we're talking 26 years ago, there weren't any of those barriers around Parliament as there are now. They're concreted, they're there to ensure that you can't ram raid, which is, for all intents and purposes, what this person tried this morning. And so security over a 26-year period has been stepped up bit by bit, and every time that there is an incident, they look again at it. And the tragic death of PC Keith Palmer on the parliamentary estate, along with the number of people who died on Westminster Bridge, has led to further security measures taking place, so that there is now basically an iron girder both sides of Westminster Bridge to ensure that vehicles cannot access the pavement anymore. So that protects the pedestrians walking about. So I'm sure again that they'll look again to see what is absolutely necessary. But I have to say, he was prevented from getting his vehicle any further than that first barrier, and for that we should be grateful, because that clearly worked. The police with armed machine guns, which you never saw in 1992, you now see as a regular occurrence, and they were able to be on the scene in a matter of minutes. And I think the speed with which they reacted is absolutely exemplary, and we should be grateful for what they've done.
And what would be your view if it was all pedestrianised around the Palace of Westminster and Parliament Square? Would that alter in some ways the nature of the heart of democracy? Is it important that vehicles can just drive past, or would that...
No, if they're a terrorist threat, then I think we need to look at it. And clearly, if you've got a vehicle packed full of explosives passing Parliament, which is then set off by a kamikaze person, then, that is a huge danger to everybody who works around our democracy. So I would say, yeah, let's look again to see which vehicles should be able to access very close to the parliamentary estate. And it may well be that, and c'est la vie, if it does protect our democracy, that we see no vehicle access other than very, very specialised for the disabled being able to access anywhere near the parliamentary building.
It does seem this man may have been on the radar of the security services. Are you confident they have the resources they need to keep an eye on all the people that they need to keep an eye on, which is potentially thousands or tens of thousands?
Yeah, well, it begs the question, doesn't it? I mean, that's almost an unanswerable question, because you can double and treble the amount of money being spent on that sort of intelligence, and still somebody will somehow or other slip under the radar. But clearly, we need to listen very carefully to the intelligence services to see what they're asking for, And we've got to make absolutely certain that they've got the resources to do the job, clearly heightened after recent events that we're asking them to do. We don't want to put their lives in any unnecessary danger than they already are in protecting Parliament.
I suppose the overwhelming sense this morning is a sense of relief in the sense that it could have been an awful lot worse. It could have been a bigger vehicle, there could have been more casualties, there could have been fatalities.
Yeah, it could have been a much bigger tragedy than was the case. Hopefully people who were knocked down have not been badly injured. Clearly some of them have been taken to hospital, but we just hope that they'll be fine. And yet we must be grateful that the systems that have been put in place because of other events seems to have worked, but let's look again to see what other measures we need to take to ensure that our democracy is properly protected.
Nigel Evans, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Let's just recap on the latest situation here. We're just at the police cordon, as we were saying, outside the Palace of Westminster, as close as we can get. It all began at 7:37 this morning. Let's just take you through the events of the morning as they did unfold there. And police are saying that this was a terror-related incident. There doesn't seem to be any doubt about that. It happened just outside the Palace of Westminster, as we say, at about 7:37 this morning, just as people were heading to work in central London. Now, the car, we gather, was a silver Ford Fiesta. It was travelling originally westbound past Parliament. It then suddenly swerved into eastbound traffic. It hit cyclists, then veered towards the security barriers, and that's where it came to a halt. Some eyewitnesses say it was travelling at about 40 miles an hour. Now, police at the scene arrested a man who they say was in his 20s. They're questioning him, they say, on suspicion of terrorism offences. He's being held at a South London police station, but all the eyewitnesses and the footage we've seen shows that armed police intervened very, very quickly indeed. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, has been saying her thoughts with the injured and thanking the emergency services for their immediate and courageous response. We know some of those injured were cyclists. They were stopped at traffic lights when the vehicle rammed into them. So a number of cyclists injured, but 2 people taken to hospital. We're just getting, I think, a statement as well from Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Foundation Trust on the casualties. Let me read that to you. Statement saying that 1 patient is being treated for non-life-threatening injuries at St Thomas's Hospital following this morning's incident in Westminster. Services in the hospital are operating as usual, but patients and visitors are advised to check with Transport for London and for road closures and travel disruption. And a statement, as we were saying, from the Prime Minister as well, praising the immediate and the courageous response of the security forces, of the armed police on the scene, very, very quickly indeed to make that arrest right outside the Palace of Westminster. Also saying that her thoughts are with those who are injured and who've been taken to hospital. And we gather there is going to be a meeting, as you would really expect, of the government's Cobra Emergency Committee. It always sits after any kind of terror attack or suspected terror attack. We gather that that is going to be at 2 o'clock this afternoon, so we'll keep you posted on that. And also we'll keep you posted on a statement we are expecting from New Scotland Yard imminently, with more details on exactly what has unfolded here at Westminster this morning. We can hear now from one eyewitness who told BBC News what he saw, Barry Williams.
Well, I heard a commotion inside the road. They were parked, waiting for the lights to change. He hit the cyclist, then swerved over towards where the safety barrier is, where the police made sure cars go through, and accelerated and hit it at quite high speed.
What was your impression? Was it a deliberate act?
Well, he seemed to.
No,
I wasn't sure what he meant to hit the cyclist. They may just be in the way, but he accelerated hard towards the barrier.
This is all business.
And what was the reaction of the police at that point? What did you see?
Well, the police were very fast. They ported over the safety barrier and head towards the car, followed by obviously lots of ambulances in the area. What also happened was the police started to do a cordon, but not only did police come towards it, police actually headed away to try and block off people walking towards it.
And what about the car? We saw video of armed officers encircling that vehicle.
Well, it's strange when it hit the barrel, of course. There was a lot of smoke, and it hit it with quite a jug. Actually,
I'm going to interrupt there because that New Scotland Yard press conference is getting underway. Neil Basu from the Metropolitan Police Assistant Commissioner. Let's listen in.
And what about you? What did you do?
well, obviously, we were pushed back after the police person
in front of the Houses of Parliament. That vehicle collided with cyclists and pedestrians before hitting a baronet and coming to a stop. 2 people have been taken to hospital. 1 man has already been discharged, and 1 woman remains in hospital because of the serious but non-life-threatening injuries. Another man is at the scene and didn't require hospital treatment. The driver of the Fiesta, who was alone in the vehicle, was arrested at the scene by armed officers who were already nearby. The man is in his late 20s, and arrested on suspicion of terrorism offences, has been taken to a South London police station where he remains in custody. Given that this appears to be a deliberate act, the method, and this being an iconic site, we are treating it as a terrorist incident, and the investigation is being led by officers from the Counter-Terrorism Command. Officers have searched the vehicle, and no other weapons have been found at this time. At this early stage of the investigation, no other suspects at the scene have been identified or reported to police. There is no intelligence at this time of further danger to Londoners or the rest of the UK connected to this incident. Our priority now is to formally establish the identity of the suspect and establish his motivation if we can. He is not currently cooperating. However, as you would expect, the Counter-Terrorism Command are making various other urgent inquiries to ensure that there is no outstanding risk to the public. Can I urge anyone who thinks that they may have information that could assist the investigation to call us on 0800 789 321. That's 0800 789 321. And thank you to the many people who have already come forward. Similarly, footage or images of this incident, you can download those to us via our website, ukpoliceimageappeal.co.uk.
Right. We're going to leave it running for to keep
Clearly,
fully
we are treating the scene and Parliament Square as a crime scene, so cordons are likely to be in place for some time. As the investigation team continues to carry out important work to establish exactly what happens. I can appreciate this has been a great deal of disruption this morning to those who live, work or were visiting this area. Thank you to the public for their patience and understanding whilst we deal with the incident. We will be working as quickly and diligently as possible in order to reopen the area. But in the meantime, I'd ask that the public try and avoid Parliament Square and Westminster at this time.
And
the safety of the public is always our top priority, and the Met Police will continue to do all that we can to protect the people of London. As always, the public should remain vigilant, and if you see anything suspicious or something that causes you concern, of course, please dial 999. So I'm happy to take a couple of questions. Assistant Bishop. Rob.
And then gliding with the gate. Footage appears to show behind the car, 2 police vans. Is that the case?
No, I've heard that this morning. There wasn't a police car in pursuit of the vehicle. I believe it was an ambulance on the
Assistant Commissioner, the vehicle appears to drive deliberately at 2 police officers. Does it look as if the driver was targeting the police officers specifically?
We can't say that at this time. I mean, it certainly appears to be a deliberate act, but what the motivation is, we can't say.
Was it somebody that counter-terrorism police officers or the counter-extremism network was aware of before, the man that you had in custody?
We haven't formally identified him yet, so it's too early to make that judgment. On the details that we have at the moment, we don't believe this person is known to either MI5 or counter-terrorism policing. And at that point, thank you very much for your patience.
So that was the Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Neil Basu there, who was just briefing the press on the latest. First of all, on the casualties, so 3 people, it seems, injured altogether after that vehicle collided with cyclists who we know were waiting at some traffic lights just across the road from the Palace of Westminster. And the police saying that one of those casualties is still being treated in a hospital at St Thomas's just across the river. Another's been discharged from hospital, and a third casualty was treated at the scene but need to go to hospital. So it appears there were 3 casualties altogether, 2 taken to hospital and 1 is still in hospital, but not with serious injuries. Now, as for the man who's been arrested, well, the police are saying he's in his late 20s. He was arrested, seen by armed police, and has been taken to a South London police station. That's where he's being questioned. And the Assistant Commissioner was just saying there, the police are trying to find out, obviously, his identity and also his motivation for what happened here at the Palace of Westminster, but saying that at the moment he's not currently cooperating. In other words, he's not giving them any answers to their questions, but they are making a lot of inquiries. We heard from Daniel Sanford a little earlier on, our Home Affairs correspondent, saying it does appear that this man was on the radar of the security services. The police also saying that this whole area, which is clearly still in lockdown, is going to be still in lockdown for some time yet. The whole area around Parliament Square and Westminster roads sealed off. And the police saying they appreciate the disturbance to the public, but clearly there's a lot of forensic work that needs to be done right now and in the coming hours, maybe in the coming days as well. Let's go back to Daniel Sanford, our Home Affairs correspondent, who was just listening to that news conference at New Scotland Yard. Daniel, what did we learn?
Important takeaway from that was the idea that the suspect, the man who was believed to be driving the vehicle at the time of the incident, is not cooperating. It's quite unusual for a senior officer to say that, but I think that gives you an idea that this wasn't a straightforward issue of him being taken to the police station saying, I made a terrible mistake and I'm really sorry that I fell asleep at the wheel. This is somebody who apparently is not answering questions, not cooperating with police officers, and Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu saying that they're still trying to formally identify him. As you say, it had been suggested to me that the man who was driving the vehicle is believed to have been on various lists of extremists, but Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu saying that he was not somebody who was known either to MI5 or counter-terrorism policing. So make of that what you will. It's not quite clear what sort of list he may have been on, but he does not appear to have been somebody that was actively being investigated, certainly in recent years. So that's the sort of suggestion from that. But of course, at the moment, we've got somebody who's been arrested for driving the vehicle, arrested on suspicion of terrorism offences, but we have a stage of anybody being charged. So this is still quite an early day of the investigation. Because of the amount of video material that's around, it's fairly easy to see what happened, which appears to be a vehicle deliberately swerving, hitting cyclists, and driving towards police officers, and then smashing into a barrier outside one of the entrances to the House of Lords on the main road that runs past the side of Parliament. So clearly that is why police are treating this as a terrorist incident, and they currently have a suspect who's not cooperating.
Daniel, if we assume it was a terrorist incident, put it into a little bit of context for us, because clearly, a lot of people are very relieved that there were what appear to be relatively minor injuries to a small number of people, certainly no fatalities, and also that the vehicle used in this incident, a pretty small Ford Fiesta, it could have been so much bigger, and the whole incident could have been so much worse.
Well, let's go back to March the 22nd last year and the Westminster Bridge incident, in which a vehicle seemed to have taken the same path this vehicle did, coming over Westminster Bridge. On that occasion, it ploughed through pedestrians on the sides of the bridge, smashed into the railings on the side of Parliament. The man then went down, successfully stabbed a police officer to death before being shot by armed police. In comparison to that, this vehicle appears to have made one turn around Parliament Square, possibly swerved through cyclists, has not seriously injured anyone, certainly not killed anyone, and has been successfully arrested without any serious injuries to him. So it is a clearly much less serious incident. As you say, a small vehicle being used that clearly wasn't going to break through those huge barriers that are around Westminster. In fact, I've seen tests done by MI5 where huge trucks have been driven into these barriers without successfully breaking through. So I think it's unlikely that any vehicle would have been able to get through those very large barriers which were originally put in place to prevent truck bombs getting close to Parliament. So that was not an incident where the vehicle was likely to get through into Parliament, the grounds of Parliament itself, but clearly it could have easily killed somebody or seriously injured someone, and frankly it looks like it was more a question of luck that didn't happen than anything else, and we're in a situation where what could have been a very, very serious incident has turned out to be an incident in which one person is still in hospital and the suspect is in custody.
Daniel, just stay there for a moment. So I just want to remind viewers what we know so far is that a man in his late 20s is being questioned by police. He's being held at a police station in South London, arrested after a vehicle appeared to be rammed into a number of cyclists. There are at least 3 people who were injured, one still in hospital, another discharged from hospital, and the vehicle, a silver Ford Fiesta, then ramming into the security barriers outside the Palace of Westminster. No details yet on whether this was a terror attack, but the police are saying they are treating it as a terror-related incident. That's the very latest from here outside the Palace of Westminster. No, we don't. Let's go back to Daniel Sanford, our Home Affairs correspondent. So, Daniel, obviously all the questions now are whether this man, if this was a terror-related incident, whether this was a man operating alone, a sort of lone wolf, as they're traditionally called, or part of some sort of plot. I mean, what is your instinct? You've covered a lot of these attacks, especially the ones last year. What is your gut instinct?
Well, certainly at this stage, there's a feeling that this is a sort of low-level incident. Obviously, it could have been incredibly serious, but it does look like it's part of some wider, enormous attack. But critically, police now need to find out everything they can about this driver, go through all of his social media, visit his address, and try and work out whether he was part of the wider network then.
Daniel, thank you very much indeed. Much more at the top of the hour with me here at Westminster. But now let's get a look at the weather with Simon King.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, we've got some sunny spells out there at the moment, particularly the further south and east you are. This is the scene at the moment in Cambridge. Those of you who've been to Cambridge are familiar with punting. A fairly decent day for that, and that's not looking too bad at all. But we have got more cloud the further north and west you go, and you can see from the satellite imagery, we've got the top massive cloud here. That's just a weather system which is also producing some rain, moving its way through Northern Ireland and in through much of Scotland. It's a little bit heavy in places, but gradually throughout this afternoon it'll tend to just peter out a touch. Some of that patch of rain spreading its way into Cumbria and Northumberland and Durham. Further south, though, remaining dry with those brighter sunny spells and feeling quite warm actually. Temperatures getting up to about 25 Celsius across the southeast. Further north and west, about 18 to 20 degrees. As we go through this evening and tonight, there'll be some lengthy clear spells, I think, for England and Wales. The cloud always stay continuing in the far north and west, and that's because we've got this weather front which is still there as we go into Wednesday. High pressure across the south is just about holding on. It is slipping its way southward as this area low pressure further north and west drives in these weather fronts, and those will continue to move their way in. Quite a bit of rain, some showers for Scotland, Northern Ireland, into Wales and northwest England throughout Wednesday. The further south and east, it's going to be dry and brighter. Quite breezy though, especially in the northwest. We could see gusts of 30 or 40 miles an hour. All of us pretty much noticing a breezy day. And temperatures again 24, 25 degrees in the east and southeast. Something a little bit fresher further north and west. Now, weather front will continue to make very slow progress south and eastward as we go into Thursday. A narrow band of cloud and rain. Behind it, some clear spells before another band of rain starting to move into Northern Ireland and into the west of Scotland. During Thursday, though, that rain will continue for a time, easing away to the southeast. Some sunny spells behind it, but a much fresher day for all of us. Those temperatures dropping by quite an amount. Bye-bye.
This is BBC News. I'm Ben Brown reporting live from Westminster, where a man in his 20s has been arrested by armed police after a vehicle collided with cyclists and then security barriers at the Palace of Westminster during the morning rush hour.
Given that this appears to be a deliberate act, the method, and this being an iconic site, we are treating it as a terrorist incident, and the investigation is being led by officers from the Counter-Terrorism Command. Officers are searching the vehicle and no other weapons have been found at this time.
The vehicle hit a number of cyclists. London Ambulance say they treated several people at the scene. One person is being treated in hospital still for non-life-threatening injuries.
It's very strange because once he hit the cyclist, he accelerated. You'd have thought he would try to put the brake across and accelerated towards the barrier.
He was getting pretty fast in my opinion. I think it's a 20 miles to 30 miles per hour zone. He was going at maybe 40 to 50 miles per hour.
Armed police officers arrested a man at the scene. They say he's in his 20s. He's being questioned now in South London. The area is still in lockdown. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, has said her thoughts are with those who've been injured, and she thanked the emergency services for their immediate and courageous response. The government's Emergency Cobra Committee will meet this afternoon. Hello from Westminster. We're at the police cordon here after this morning's incident, which they say was terror-related. Just down the road there, a vehicle, a silver Ford Fiesta, at 7:37 this morning, at the peak of the morning rush hour, collided with cyclists and then hit security barriers outside the Palace of Westminster as well. Let's just talk you through exactly what happened. It was as people were heading in central London. Now, the car was travelling westbound past the Houses of Parliament when it swerved across onto the other side of the road into eastbound traffic, hitting security barriers. The whole area now cordoned off, and the police say that is likely to stay that way, that lockdown, for some time. Now, several cyclists were hit. It's understood they were waiting at traffic lights at the time. 2 or 3 people were treated at the scene. One woman is still in hospital, being treated at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital with serious but not life-threatening injuries. Now, the police are saying that they arrested a man who they say is in his late 20s. They are questioning him, they say, on suspicion of terrorism offences. But they say he's not cooperating. They're trying to establish his identity and his motivation, but he's refusing to answer their questions. And they say they haven't yet identified him, and that there's no intelligence at this time, they say, of any further danger to Londoners. Prime Minister's already tweeted with her thoughts, saying that her thoughts are with those who were injured in this, what appears to have been a terror attack this morning. She has thanked the emergency services for what she called their immediate and courageous response. As I say, a meeting of the government's Cobra Emergency Committee scheduled for 2 o'clock this afternoon. And in the meantime, we've been getting an update from the Metropolitan Police Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu at New Scotland Yard.
At 7:37 a.m, a silver Ford Fiesta was involved in a collision in front of the Houses of Parliament. That vehicle collided with cyclists and pedestrians before hitting a barrier and coming to a stop. 2 people have been taken to hospital. 1 man has already been discharged and 1 woman remains in hospital with serious but thankfully non-life-threatening injuries. Another man was also treated at the scene but didn't require hospital treatment. The driver of the Fiesta, who was alone in the vehicle, was arrested at the scene by armed officers who were already occupied. The man is in his late 20s, been arrested on suspicion of terrorism offences and has been taken to a South London police station where he remains in custody. Given that this appears to be a deliberate act, the method, and this being an outside, treating it as a terrorist incident, and the investigation is being led by officers from the Counter-Terrorism Command. Officers are searching the vehicle and no other weapons have been found at this time. At this early stage of the investigation, no other suspects at the scene have been identified or reported to police. There is no intelligence at this time of further danger to Londoners or the rest of the UK connected to this incident. Our priority now is to formally establish the identity of the suspect and establish his motivation if we can. He is not currently cooperating. However, as you would expect, detectives from the Counter-Terrorism Command are making various other urgent inquiries to ensure that there is no outstanding risk to the public.
So that's Assistant Neil Basu talking to the press a few minutes ago. Let's talk now to Peter Kerb, a former detective chief inspector with the Metropolitan Police. Thanks for being with us. So the police are saying they've got this man, or got a man in custody. They're trying to work out exactly who he is, why he did what he did, but he's not cooperating.
Unfortunately, that's not an unusual situation with suspects detained. They just come in and, like they do in TV drama, just immediately admit everything so you can get it solved in an hour. They will need to identify him. That will feed in very much so, almost totally so really, into the motivation in the absence of him explaining why he did it. I think the circumstances are such that it's plain that it wasn't just an ordinary traffic accident. I think that's near enough eliminated right now. If it's deliberate, therefore, the reason is why. And obviously that can range from terrorism at the top of the tree to a road rage incident or some sort of aggravated protest at the other end of the scale.
And the other question, of course, is whether if this was a terror-related incident, was this a lone wolf, somebody operating just on their own, or was it part of any wider conspiracy?
Well, that will be the main reason why they need to get to the bottom of who he is and what the motivation is, because obviously any further threat doesn't come from him. He's now locked up. But it would come from anyone that's associated with him or any larger organisation that he's working with. And so it's really important that they do identify him. They will identify him at some point. They've got a number of starts for 10, the vehicle itself, fingerprints and DNA, maybe no immediate hit, but maybe there'll be some way of tracing connections abroad or something like that. But of course, there are a number of lines of inquiry that they'll follow. We've got good footage of him. They may even be getting phone calls ringing up saying who he is. If anybody does recognise him or does recognise the vehicle, then the terrorism branch would really like a call from them. 0800 789 321.
And obviously, just down the road there where it happened behind us, a lot of forensic work going on right now to find out more about what happened.
Yeah, for sure. The scene is going to be examined in fine detail. The anti-terrorist branch do the same sort of examination as everybody else for any other type of major incident, but just to a far deeper degree. That will be confidential. It's unlikely to add anything other than anything in the vehicle that has identify him. The wider scene is unlikely to add anything in terms of either his identity or the motivation. So it's for future use in any proceedings.
What are your instincts about what happened here? I mean, clearly it could have been so much worse. That's the initial response of a lot of people. Relief, in a sense, that this wasn't on the scale of previous terror attacks that we saw last year, including the Westminster Bridge attack.
For sure, the officers that first responded to this, and we've seen footage of them arriving in two ARVs just within seconds of him crashing into the barrier, with weapons drawn, then calling him out of the vehicle, getting him out of the vehicle. Sure, if you've got a firearm, then you're protected against any knife or any gun that the person might have to a certain extent. But of course, that vehicle could contain explosives or anything else, and that would have been running through their minds. So you've got a situation where you've got a vehicle you want to be further away from, but you've got a suspect that you've got to be close to deal with. And so that is just straightforward bravery and courage. We've heard the Prime Minister praising the emergency services. I'm afraid they don't believe a word she says after 8 years of the way she's treated them. The bottom line is we are seeing this day in, day out with officers, not just around terrorism, but around serious crime. They are behaving extremely bravely, and they're just not being rewarded for it.
And what does it say about security around the Palace of Westminster and the improvements that there have been since last year's attack here, that there was such a rapid response by those officers, but also that the security barriers clearly did their job as well?
The Palace of Westminster is probably one of the most secure places in the country, certainly in London. There are armed officers there all the time, although it was armed response vehicles that seem to be the primary sort of arrival of the armed response vehicles brought most of the armed officers to the scene today. But the barriers, yeah, they did their job. They stopped vehicles getting into premises. They are very effective in that. But of course, if you've got a vehicle with explosives in it, then if it went bang at the barriers, it's going to have just as devastating an effect as if it manages to get through.
Do you think there needs to be further improvements to security at Westminster? Some people are talking about pedestrianising the whole area, not allowing traffic anywhere near the Houses of Parliament.
It's impossible to protect against an attack. If somebody wants to attack a premises, then they will. If you protect that premises, then they'll just attack as close as they can get in. And the further you keep them away, then they're likely to have larger explosive devices. We've seen it in places like Afghanistan, where you've got the green zone. They have really secure perimeters to that. And all that happens is they bring a big truck bomb to that security point, get as far as they can. And if they get no further, they just blow it up at that point. And so you're not going to, you can protect the fabric of the building, but you're not going to prevent an attack.
OK, Peter Kirkham, thank you very much for your time. Peter Kirkham there, former Detective Chief Inspector with the Metropolitan Police, giving his thoughts on what happened here at 7:37 this morning, the height of the morning rush hour, when this vehicle, a silver relatively small vehicle, this was a terror attack, apparently ramming into cyclists, swerving onto the other side of the road, hitting cyclists, then driving at speed, accelerating up to about 40 miles an hour, according to eyewitnesses, into the security barriers, and then the bonnet, the front of the car, completely crumpling, the airbag apparently blowing up as well, and then the armed police very quickly moving in just a few seconds later and making that arrest. And the man in his 20s, we gather, according to the police, being questioned at a police station in South London on terrorism-related suspicion of terrorism-related offences. Well, let's hear from an eyewitness who saw the events as they unfolded here outside the Palace of Westminster, Barry Williams.
Well, I heard a commotion and turned round to see a silver car heading towards the cyclists on the wrong side of the road. They were parked, waiting for the lights to change. He hit the cyclist, then swerved over towards where the safety barrier is, where the police make sure cars go through, and accelerated and hit it at quite high speed.
What was your impression? Was it a deliberate act?
Well, it seemed to. I wasn't sure whether he meant to hit the cyclist. They may have just been in the way, but he accelerated hard towards the barrier.
And what was the reaction of the police at that point? What did you see?
Well, the police were very fast. They pointed over the safe barrier and headed towards the car, followed by obviously lots of armed police who were in the area. What also happened was the police started to do a cordon. Not only did police come towards us, the police actually headed away to try and block off people walking towards us.
And what about the car? We saw video of armed officers encircling that vehicle.
Well, it was strange when it hit the barrier, of course. There was a lot of smoke, and it hit it with quite a jar. It actually came off the ground and landed again, because it's quite a light car. But we're not sure. It's, when they rushed to the scene, grabbed the bloke, but then they seemed to walk away.
And what about you? What did you do?
Well, obviously we were pushed back. After the police first got to the car, they then turned around and started to push us back towards where the lights were. And that's when I walked past and saw lots of pedestrians standing there, but also the cyclists. There was a few on the ground. Some were holding their arms. There was bikes everywhere.
And what about at the moment of the collision? Presumably, given events here in Westminster in the last year or two, a frightening moment.
Well, it was frightening, but that's why I was walking backwards, not actually standing too close to the car. You never shot what's in the car.
And there's a scene on the ground. The cyclist. Can you give us an idea of the numbers? The scene at that set of lights where the cyclists had been. Well, there was about 10 cyclists waiting for the lights to change. I don't think he hit all of them. He hit about 4 or 5, and there was bikes everywhere. I was very impressed. One of the cyclists got up and started to change the car. Good heavens. Yes. There was one laying on the ground which was being treated, and 2 or 3 were just sitting there holding their arms against posts. And what was your sense of the motive, if there was one behind this? Could it have been an accident?
Well, if it was very strange, because once he hit the cyclist, he accelerated. He thought he hit the brakes on, he swerved across and accelerated towards the barrier.
And then he was trying to get away from the scene.
It was a very bad driver then.
Yeah, that's enough.
Yeah, as someone who's worked in Westminster for a long time, you would of course have been around during the Westminster Bridge attack last year. What was going through your mind when you saw this incident?
Well, it looked like a fever one, because it was more ability to drive at the barrier.
And the reaction of the police at that, they responded very quickly and in numbers.
They did, and those seemed well rehearsed. As I said, police ran towards the car, but also some ran away to actually stop people walking towards where the car was.
Well, that was Barry Williams, an eyewitness to what happened here at Westminster, talking to Mark Easton, our Home editor. The government's Cobra Emergencies Committee is going to be meeting at 2 o'clock this afternoon to discuss what happened here. We've heard from the police already that they are treating it as a terror-related incident and that the man they're questioning is being held on suspicion of terrorism offences. We've been hearing on behalf of the government from the Housing and Community Secretary, James Brokenshire.
Thoughts are with everyone who's been involved with this morning's incident, and I want to thank the emergency services for their response. This is being led by the police. The counter-terrorism police are leading the investigation for the Metropolitan Police, but they are keeping open-minded around this incident, and obviously the police will provide further updates as and when they're available.
And do you know whether it was deliberate or accidental and the man's been arrested on the terror offences?
The police have obviously are leading the investigation. This is an ongoing incident. I can't offer further details. What I can obviously say is the Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terrorism Command leading on this. A man was detained outside of the Palace of Westminster, but the police are saying that we should keep open-minded in respect of what has occurred, but obviously our thoughts are very firmly with everyone caught up in this incident, those who have been injured, and our thoughts are very firmly with them.
That was James Brokenshire speaking on behalf of the government, the Housing and Communities Secretary. Well, the police have also been talking this morning. Let's hear from our Home Affairs correspondent, Daniel Sanford, who's at New Scotland Yard. What is the picture that the police are painting for us, Daniel?
The worst of the casualties. Another person's been discharged from hospital, another person treated at the scene. So thankfully we're in a situation where there's been an apparent attack on Westminster, but with nobody killed and only one person apparently seriously injured, and she's not suffering from life-threatening injuries. The Cobra committee is meeting at 2 o'clock this afternoon, but it is a meeting at the level of officials only, so that means that ministers like the Home Secretary won't be attending at this stage. So that shows this is being treated as a moderately serious incident. So this is because although this was, by all accounts, an attempt to attack Parliament, it hasn't been a very successful one, and we haven't got large-scale loss of life. Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu said to us that the man who's believed to be the driver of the vehicle in his late 20s, who is in custody, they are trying to identify that man, but he is not currently cooperating. So certainly we don't have a situation where the driver has been helpful with the police and given a helpful explanation as to what has happened, and therefore police don't know what his motivation was. But we've gone from a situation where, when James Brokenshire was a situation where they're actually treating it as a terrorist incident. So that's their prime belief as to what the cause of this was, that this was a politically motivated attack on cyclists and pedestrians and on Parliament itself. Clearly the key thing in this investigation now is to work on the identity of that suspect, on the place where he lives and people that he knows, and also in this modern era on his social media and computer usage. And by going through his property, talking to people that he knows, and by going through all of his computer and smartphone memories, that is how police are likely to work out what was the reason why this man did deliberately drive his vehicle into Parliament, if that's indeed what he did. One other interesting thing at this early stage of the investigation, we believe the man's vehicle actually drove down this road, down Embankment, towards Parliament before turning right onto Bridge Street and then around Parliament Square, because we've seen some footage which shows him doing that some minutes before the incident. So it looks like after that he may have done at least one loop of Parliament Square itself. We're busy trying to look at footage ourselves to just be sure about that, but it does look as if he's at least done one circuit of Parliament Square before then driving off down towards the House of Lords entrance, where his vehicle eventually smashed into the barriers there after hitting the cyclists and pedestrians. And you see police officers jumping out of the way on that footage, so he may, of course, have been deliberately targeting police officers as well. So it does look like he might have done a bit of a circuit and a bit of a recce as he was going into this, what appears to be deliberate attack on Parliament.
And Daniel, we know that just down the road from where I am, they're doing forensic work, forensic tests at the scene where that vehicle, that silver Ford Fiesta, collided with security barriers. And presumably they'll also be looking at all the various bits of footage, CCTV and mobile phone footage. But in the end, I guess they kind of know what happened. As you're suggesting, it's trying to find out the why rather than the what happened.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, how do you work out why it happened? First of all, did the driver say anything in the immediate aftermath? Are there eyewitnesses or the officers who very, very quickly responded who can give an account of anything that he said in that immediate aftermath? Because if you remember, after the Finsbury Park attack, for example, the driver of the vehicle, the Finsbury Park attack, gave quite a lot of quite detailed information in the immediate aftermath of that attack. So did this driver say anything immediately in the aftermath? Has he said anything at all, although police say he's not cooperating, has he said anything at all while he's being held in custody at Southwark Police Station? But then, if none of that produces anything, then it's all about any records that there are in his smartphone, his computers, any paper that can be found that either shows any kind of planning of this or that shows any kind of mindset, any kind of ideology that might give clues to the motivation. And that's the work that you can be assured to be going on now. I'd be incredibly surprised if there aren't at this moment police officers searching a property somewhere in the UK and getting hold of that material now. And so often people do travel with their smartphones, whether or not this driver was, but if he was travelling with his smartphone, and of course the police would have had that already. That was certainly the case of Khalid Massoud, who carried out the Westminster Bridge attack on March the 22nd last year. His smartphone was seized almost immediately.
Daniel, many thanks indeed. That's Daniel Sanford, our Home Affairs correspondent, with the very latest from News Scotland Yard. And in terms of the casualties, well, everybody's been saying what a relief it is that the casualties have been relatively light. When the vehicle hit cyclists, there were a number of injuries. We gather 3 people treated at the scene. 1 didn't need to go to hospital. 2 were taken to hospital. 1 has been discharged since then, but 1 is still in hospital, but not with serious or in any way life-threatening injuries. And meanwhile, that man in his late 20s, according to Metropolitan Police, still being questioned at a South London police station on suspicion of terror offences. That's the latest from here at Westminster. Back now to the studio.
Ben, thanks very much indeed. We will rejoin Ben at Westminster in just a moment or two's time, but we want to bring you some breaking news that's coming to us from totally other part of the world. This news coming out of the northern Italian port city of Genoa, where apparently a section of a motorway bridge in the city has collapsed in stormy weather. You can see the pictures here, quite extraordinary. This viaduct, which carries traffic on the A10 motorway in the city of Genoa. This large section, they reckon around 200 metres, has collapsed onto the urban area below. Talk of possibly railway tracks below as well. Eyewitnesses reporting that vehicles, cars and lorries may well have gone.
Was rammed into some cyclists and then into security barriers. I'm joined here now at the Police Cordon by former Metropolitan Police Chief Superintendent Del Babu, who was also used to run the security team for the police in the House of Commons, in the Houses of Parliament. So you can tell us a lot about security.
It's to vote, so you'll find when the bells go for a voting system, so essentially when they're warned, and they'll have offices around Westminster, and they're rushing in. Many of them come in taxis. So you'd have to really look at how the voting system is changed. And recently, when we've had some very, very tight votes around Brexit, people have been brought in ambulances. So we still have the system in this country where you physically have to be present. So you'd have to really change that Parliament system, and there has been a lot of talk about changing that system. But infrastructure is always going to be very, very difficult to deal with. And the key things are to make sure that we've got enough resources, and police resources have been reduced by 20%. over the last few years, and I think we've seen the impact now when we've seen an increase in night crime across the country, the impact of terrorism. Now, this takes a lot of police resources and people are trained. I think the other important element is the relationship that the authorities have with the Muslim community, and we've seen that the Muslim community have been very upset about the comments that Boris Johnson has made recently about the burqa, comparing women who wear the niqab to being looking like bank robbers and letterboxes. Not particularly helpful language when you're trying to build up relationships with the Muslim community. So I think we need to be looking at the issue about relationships, issue about how many police we have, and then we need to make sure we've got police officers from Muslim backgrounds in those key positions, and at the moment we don't have that. So that's a really, really important area for the police and the security services to consider.
Is there a measure of relief that this attack, if it was a terror attack, could have been a lot worse and there could have been a lot more casualties?
Absolutely. I think the police have learnt a significant amount from previous attacks. So you now have barriers that protect pedestrians, there's barriers for cycle lanes. So I think that reduces the damage that somebody's going to be able to do with a vehicle. I think what we need to be looking at is how we can sort of look at this individual, look at what lessons we can learn. I mean, it's very, very early to say what his background is, what the security services knew about this individual. We should be making sure that we engage with the communities and learning lessons around stopping these incidents happening before they get to this stage.
Dal Babu, thank you very much indeed, former Metropolitan Police Chief Superintendent. And we can also speak now to Chris Phillips, who's on the line, who was a former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. Chris Phillips, what are your thoughts after what appears to have been a terror attack here, a second terror attack in 2 years at the Palace of Westminster, but as we've been saying, with relatively low-level casualties, 3 people, it seems, injured, 1 still in hospital?
Well, I think we've been very lucky, and if you get away with a terrorist attack in any city centre that has these number of casualties, we've been tremendously lucky. And looking at the footage, it does appear that perhaps this person was on a recce situation and has decided, perhaps because of the ambulance behind him, to do something incredibly stupid. Now, we're never going to be able to have a complete protection against this type of attack. We mustn't start blaming people for saying things across the media. That's ridiculous. What we've got to do is to make sure that we've got the protection measures in place, but also we are picking up threats before they get to us. And we need to resource the police to make sure that they're able to do that.
Now, we've heard, Chris Phillips, that the police are obviously questioning the man that they have in custody at the moment, that they've arrested. They're saying he's not cooperating. Is it your gut feeling that this was somebody acting alone or maybe part of a wider conspiracy?
Well, I think that's the key message, and that's the key thing that the police are trying to establish at the moment. Of course, we're asking the police to investigate horrendous crimes with laws that really allow the suspect not to say anything at all. And what that does is push the police into having to deal with the social media, what the phone will tell them, the computer records, etc., in order to get the rationale behind this incident. Because whilst we're pretty convinced there's a terrorist attack, it may not be. But we're really asking the police to do a very difficult job. And luckily, as we saw, the number of casualties are very low. And it's very strange that you would choose this method of attack, because whilst it's a copycat attack, it's actually a very ineffectual one, and those barriers will stop any vehicle, even trucks, at 50 miles an hour. So you're not going to get through those unless the gate is actually open.
I just want to interrupt you. Let me just interrupt you for a moment, because we're just seeing a recovery vehicle just driving down along Millbank, along the embankment here, which we think is probably a vehicle that's perhaps going to recover the small silver Ford Fiesta car that was used in this attack. We're not 100% sure about that. That's a bit of speculation. But you can see with the flashing blue lights just driving down there to the Palace of Westminster. And it looked like a recovery truck that is going to perhaps put that Ford Fiesta and take it away. A lot of forensic work being done there at the moment, and has been ever since the incident happened, really. It all happened at 7:37 this morning, and that Ford Fiesta colliding first of all with cyclists and then with the security barriers at high speed.
So sorry to interrupt you there, Chris Phillips, but in terms of whether or not this man, this suspect, would have been on the security services radar, of course it's always, and we keep saying this, it's always so difficult, isn't it? Where if he wasn't, it's difficult because security services will be asked why he wasn't, and if he was, they'll be asked why didn't you have more manpower perhaps carrying out surveillance?
Yeah, and these are the difficult things for the police. Of course, I would be incredibly surprised if this person hasn't got a criminal record of some history tells us that's almost always the case. Whether or not that is calculated it remains to be seen. Sometimes it has been, sometimes it hasn't. I think you have to be realistic. This guy, until the moment he turned left, was not committing any criminal offences. He was just driving around London, as many people do every day of the week. The moment he turned left and knocked the cyclist over, he started committing criminal offences. And a very short while after that, he was arrested by police. So unless the police have got real intelligence that this guy is a complete danger, they won't be following him. Unless they've got some real intelligence that he is going to commit or about to commit a criminal terrorist attack, then they haven't got the resources to follow all these people. And we're talking 20 to 23,000 people that are in this sort of section of society that police are really worried about. And on top of that, 3,000 more people who are really concerned. So the police, we're asking them to do an impossible job, and they do the best they can with the resources that we give them as a society.
Does security around the Palace of Westminster need to be further tightened up, do you think?
Well, you're always going to have a gap in security. Whenever you have someone that's able to drive a car and there's pedestrians nearby, you've got big problems. The fact is this, that parliaments around the world, you cannot take your car close to the White House, as an example. Generally, parliaments are seen as iconic sites, ideal targets. We've seen that at the Palace of Westminster. And maybe actually moving vehicles further away from the scene is a good idea. And I know there's been talk for many years about pedestrianising the front of the palace and also the boat entrances at the back, so boats can get close to the rear of the palace. So all these things are continuously being thought through. It will have a knock-on effect to traffic in the capital, that's a fact. But sometimes you do have to use your common sense. If a location is going to be attacked regularly, then give it the best protection that you can.
Okay, Chris Phillips, thank you so much for your thoughts and analysis. Former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office, Chris Phillips there. Well, we've also been here from New Scotland Yard, the Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu, Assistant Commissioner on Specialist Operations, briefed the press a short time ago.
At 7:37 a.m, a silver Ford Fiesta was involved in a collision in front of the Houses of Parliament. That vehicle collided with cyclists and pedestrians before hitting a barrier and coming to a stop. 2 people have been taken to hospital. 1 man has already been discharged, and 1 woman remains in hospital treated for serious but thankfully non-life-threatening injuries. Another man was also treated at the scene but didn't require hospital treatment. The driver of the Fiesta, who was alone in the vehicle, was arrested at the scene by armed officers already. The man is in his late 20s, arrested on suspicion of terrorism offences, and has been taken to a South London police station where he remains in custody. Given that this appears to be a deliberate act, the method, and this being an iconic site, we are treating it as a terrorist incident, and the investigation is being led by officers from the Counter-Terrorism Command. Officers are searching the vehicle, and no other weapons have been found at this time. At this early stage of the investigation, no other suspects at the scene have been identified or reported to police. There is no intelligence at this time of further danger to Londoners or the rest of the UK connected to this incident. Our priority now is to formally establish the identity of the suspect and establish his motivation if we can. He is not currently cooperating. However, as you would expect, detectives from the Counter-Terrorism Command are making various other urgent inquiries to ensure that there is no outstanding risk to the public.
Well, that was the latest from New Scotland Yard a short time ago. We can speak now to Jason Williams, who saw what happened this morning. Jason, just tell us where you were and what you saw.
Yeah. I was basically coming from Westminster Bridge Road. I live in that area, and I've walked over Westminster Bridge, and then I'm on to Millbank, and I've seen House of Parliament, a man driving very fast at speed, erratically. He's hit the barriers, and then specialist police have come onto the scene within minutes. They've removed the man. I understand he's been arrested, and now because I asked the police, what's going on, and they said, it's just an incident, but now I'm told it's actually being classified as terrorism. Yeah.
What was running through your mind when you saw?
I was thinking, oh no, not again. This happened last year, and I was thinking, no, not again. I'm a father of two. I've got two young sons, aged almost 7 and 5.5. Yeah, Noah and Elijah, and I'm just very, very worried and concerned about what's going on in the local area. I love this area. I've lived here for 44 years. Yeah. And that's it, really, yeah.
The police seem to intervene really quickly.
Yeah, they did. I commend the Met Police and the Specialist Police. I think this is the City of London Police, I think, yeah. So I commend them, yeah.
And the vehicle itself, did you see it actually hit the crash barrier?
The impact, yeah.
What sort of speed was it travelling
about 40 to 50 miles per hour, in my opinion. I'm a driver myself, so yeah.
And what was the impact when it did hit that crash barrier?
I saw smoke coming from the engine, yeah. Or definitely the front of the car, yeah.
So it was quite an impact. And then how soon after that did the police move in and arrest the suspect?
I would say about between 10 to 20 minutes after, yeah.
10 to 20 seconds?
10 to 15 minutes, in my opinion. Wrong, but, I don't think it was seconds. I'm talking about the Specialist Police. The police that were guarding Parliament, they were obviously there in seconds, yeah.
And we gather it also hit cyclists. Did you see that as well?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
You saw that as well?
Yeah, it was horrible, yeah.
So what happened there? The vehicle was swerved over.
He was and driving erratically at speed, and he's hit a cyclist, yeah. That's what's happened. So is that cyclist okay?
Well, we gather 3 were injured, and one is still in hospital, but not serious injuries. That's what we're told.
Well, yeah, I pray that they're okay. It's not nice to be on your, people cycling to work, whatever, and they're getting hit by a terrorist. It's not acceptable. It needs to stop. Something needs to be done by government. I think they're having a laugh. They're attacking government. They're not. You know what I mean? They're going for government now. I'm not saying it should be in a tourist spot, which is done, but it is a tourist spot consensually. But yeah, I don't know what's going on. It's just very, very difficult times. And, we're now approaching 2019, and it's still, this has been going on now. These similar attacks have been going on for at least a year and a half, I believe, yeah.
Jason Williams, eyewitness to what happened here this morning. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you very much for your time. Well, that is the latest, and as we were hearing earlier, that man in his late 20s still being questioned by police at a police station in South London. And one of those injured still in hospital, but not with serious or in any way life-threatening injuries. Another person who was in hospital has now been discharged. So an overwhelming sense really amongst the emergency services and people around Westminster of relief that this was a terror attack. It could have been so much worse. That's the latest from Westminster. Back to you in the studio.
Ben, thanks very much indeed, and we will of course return to Ben at Westminster shortly, but we do want to bring you up to date with other news from this morning. News just breaking in the last
several people. The suspect is in his late 20s. Police say he had no weapons and there was no one else in the car with him. The Ford Fiesta car hit cyclists and pedestrians before crashing into a security barrier protecting the Palace of Westminster.
Given that this appears to be a deliberate act, the method, and this being an iconic site, we are treating it as a terrorist incident.
I'll be reporting live from the scene. Police say they are questioning the terror suspect at a police station in South London. So far, though, he is refusing to answer their questions about who he is and what were his motives.
On the programme this lunchtime, a motorway bridge has partially collapsed in the Italian city of Genoa, with dozens feared dead. The government says it is an immense tragedy. Good afternoon and welcome to BBC News at 1. A man's being held on suspicion of terror offences after a car collided with cyclists in Westminster. The vehicle ploughed into a security barrier near Old Palace Yard in front of the Houses of Parliament. Several people were taken to hospital and the area is still cordoned off. The man in custody is in his late 20s and police said he's not cooperating with them. Theresa May has praised the rapid response of the emergency services and said her thoughts were with the people who've been hurt. The government's emergency Cobra committee is to meet this afternoon. Well, Ben Brown is in Westminster for us now. Ben.
Yeah, Rita, we're at the police cordon. It happened just down the road here. Now, this whole area of Westminster is still in lockdown. All the roads around the Palace of Westminster and Parliament Square still sealed off to traffic and to pedestrians. Of the people who were injured, only one is still in hospital, we're being told, and that person doesn't have serious injuries. So there is an overwhelming feeling of relief this lunchtime that what appears to have been another terror attack in London was not worse. This report from Richard Lister.
Sirens wailing across Westminster as police converge on the car within seconds. Immediately after the crash, a moment of confusion as the car sits smoking at the barriers outside the House of Lords. Police start pushing people back. Armed officers, weapons drawn, swarm over to the car. Stage, they still don't know if this is an accident or an attack. The driver is pulled out. He's filmed standing quietly at the scene in handcuffs. Police confirm later he's been arrested on suspicion of terror offences. A BBC camera caught the progress of the silver Ford Fiesta making its way slowly around Parliament Square. But then the driver darts back onto the wrong side of the road, ploughing through several cyclists waiting for the lights to change. He appears to accelerate and then pulls into the parliamentary access lane, crashing into the barriers.
He was driving about, I'd say, at least 50 miles per hour. The guy, he seemed to be like focused. He wasn't panicked or anything.
But this is what he left in his wake. On the ground, one cyclist lies seriously injured and is treated by paramedics. 2 people were taken to hospital. A man retrieves the car's license plate. Another sits on the pavement in a state of shock. This man was with them when the car struck.
My initial reaction was to run after him just because I thought he was a errant car driver. And then as police said clear the area, it became more apparent that it was something more serious.
With the area cleared, police began their investigation. Sniffer dogs were brought in to tar for explosives. Police say no weapons were found, but they're treating this a terror attack.
Given that this appears to be a deliberate act, the method, and this being an iconic site, we are treating it as a terrorist incident, and the investigation is being led by officers from the Counter-Terrorism Command. There is no intelligence at this time of further danger to Londoners or the rest of the UK connected to this incident.
As one of the busiest parts of London remained on lockdown, the Prime Minister praised the courage of the emergency responders. The government, like everyone else, is waiting for a clearer picture to emerge of what happened here.
Our thoughts are with everyone who's been involved with this morning's incident, and I want to thank the emergency services for their response. This is being led by the police. The counter-terrorism police are leading the investigation for the Metropolitan Police, but they are keeping open-minded around this incident.
The police have still not formally identified the arrested man, thought to be in his 20s. They've said he's not cooperating with their investigation. Richard Lister, BBC News.
Well, our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford is at New Scotland Yard this afternoon. And Daniel, what is your sense? Does it look like this was perhaps a lone wolf operating by himself or part of a wider conspiracy?
say there's a sense here that it was a slightly low-level attack, though of course an attack on one of the most iconic sites in the country, and to a degree an unsuccessful attack, in that if the man who was driving his vehicle tried to kill anybody, he didn't succeed in doing that, and there is just the female cyclist who's seriously injured in hospital but not in a life-threatening condition. Obviously, police trying to work out exactly who this man is. He's not cooperating at the moment, they say. I understand that there is a belief that he's from the Birmingham area, and a lot of effort is being put into that. So we got a suspect possibly from Birmingham in the late 20s, not cooperating with police and detectively wanting to work out from his computers, his smartphone and from his home address if there's any signs of planning of this attack, and of course critically as well, whether there's any sign of him cooperating with others and whether he's therefore part of some wider group. But certainly at this stage we seem to have an unsuccessful terrorist attack on Westminster with the only suspect in custody.
All right, Daniel, thank you very much. Daniel Sanford, our Home Affairs correspondent. There is a meeting of the government's Cobra Emergency Committee shortly at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Also, there's been a lot of praise for the police, for the armed police, the speed and the bravery with which they intervened and made that arrest this morning. Security around the Palace of Westminster was intensifying last year. There are calls now perhaps for it to be further tightened, even pedestrianising the whole area, so that vehicles can't get anywhere near the Palace of Westminster. Rita, back to you.
Ben, thank you. Ben Brown there. Well, our security correspondent Frank Gardner is here with me now. Frank, in light of all the attacks that happened in the UK last year, how seriously is this one being taken?
Well, you saw from the reaction there that it was a very prompt and robust reaction by the police. So, in that sense, they took it very seriously. Armed police reacted immediately, saw them jumping over barriers. If you drive past the Palace of Westminster, you will see, if you know what to look for, armed police vehicles, which are basically mobile armories that are able to react very quickly. And this all stems back to the Mumbai attack of 10 years ago, 2008, where planners got together and realised that if a similar attack took place here in London, the police simply weren't ready for it at the time. They outgunned the police, and now at any one time in central London, the idea is that an armed police response vehicle can react within 8 minutes and on the scene. In this case, it was very, very early. At the moment, they still don't know exactly what the motivation of this man was. It could be that he's disturbed. Most importantly, was he directed by anybody else? We don't know that yet.
Frank, many thanks. England cricketer Ben Stokes has been found not guilty.